Okay, lovely people. It's Thursday, and with tomorrow being a bank holiday Friday, this is our last lesson today, this week. I'm hoping by the end of it, we would have done this guided reading through the article. So we know that really what's guiding our reading, in one sense, is this overarching question. According to the article, how are social factors determining a person's use of language? And the article is already suggesting a descriptivist, perspective of our writer, that actually social factors do influence a person's use of language, but they shouldn't. And that is an important distinction. Our writer is making this case that yes, some factors, some external factors, how society views people, the prestige they put on a particular way of speaking, do affect people's use of language. However, the writer is already stressing that that isn't necessarily the right attitude, the right way to view language. And that's where they're going to take us through into this next part of the article. So just make sure you've got your article notes from yesterday, that you remember the place where we're starting. Okay, and again, very similar process. We're doing that lovely, gentle, warming up reading style where we talk through the article together, we make notes. There's going to be some tasks that I direct you to, and then we share our response. But by the end of today, we would have read this article and be really confident in understanding what it means and some of the ways in which this writer is conveying her ideas. Okay, so we're picking up at the article, and actually there's a nice graphological feature that we haven't seen in our articles that we've looked at in class so far or previously, but are a part of this one, and that's the use of a subheading. So as you can see, we've got this, how far is too far, this interrogative that works as a subheading within the article. Okay, now this is organizational device. It says over here that subheadings can be used to organize and guide the reader. And you might remember from the first lesson at the beginning of this week that we did recognize that this is part of the BBC Worklife area of the website. And that meant something about the readership, that people reading this article are going to be able to cope with an extended response. This is a long article, okay? But our writer is working it out, is taking advantage of the fact that if they're on this BBC Worklife site, they are looking for serious information, serious documented kind of responses about the issues affecting them at work. In other words, these aren't people just flicking through a web page for a bit of entertainment. I remember reading several articles today about Elon Musk and Grimes and the new baby name, and I was just clicking my way through very quickly, very superficially, just a little bit of that going down the rabbit hole of something that caught my eye. The difference for this site is anticipating that its readers can cope with extended information and extended ideas. However, they're still using those subheadings to kind of break the information down to give an organizational sense of control. Okay, and this question, how far is too far, not only works to just break up the article, but also to suggest a shift, okay, in approach, in ideas. Okay, so we've got this interrogative headline, how far is too far? Okay, and then it goes on to say, but when we examine the reasons why anyone would consider changing their accent, we uncover a raft of biases that shouldn't necessarily be reinforced. In other words, when you look at the reasons why people are changing the way they speak, it's because of biased opinions. And this lovely end part here in this kind of relative clause shouldn't necessarily be reinforced. In other words, actually these biases that are pressurizing people, these extrinsic drives, these external drives that are pressurizing people to change, aren't necessarily healthy. First, it's not exactly easy to put on a new accent for work and take it off when home, like you would a new suit, even if you're a highly trained actor. No doubt we find some accents more entertaining or more amusing than others. Now that reminds us of that word aesthetic judgment. We've talked about this in class. Sometimes we make aesthetic judgments. Oh, I like the sound of something, therefore I'm going to esteem it. I'm going to value it based on what I like. So the idea that some accents can be entertaining or amusing is an aesthetic judgment. Okay, it's not that they're linguistically better or worse. I personally just like how it sounds. I find it entertaining or amusing. My aesthetic judgment kicks in. But accents aren't just purely about how we speak. They are one of the most distinctive cues for where we come from. They immediately mark out who we are, and they form a core part of our identity. So this is the idea of Social factors from previous weeks, looking at the relationship between how I view myself within society, my ethnicity, my experiences, my values, and how that defines who I am. Entire stereotypes have been built up around different accents. New Yorkers are rude, British RP speakers are educated, Yorkshire speakers are trustworthy, Southern Americans are pleasant, and Birmingham speakers, depending on who you ask, either sound melodic or like criminals. Accents can be funny things until they're not. Whether you're from Birmingham or Brooklyn, working class or the upper crust, a second language speaker or native born, accents say a lot more about someone than you might expect. Okay, so it just says here this task, this linguistic task here, is just to make a note really at this stage of the discourse markers. We've got opening words and phrases used at the beginning of every paragraph, and they can help you track the development of ideas. So classic. So this is really just about making a note of this, identifying it on the article, but it's always about a change of direction from the previous section. Okay, but is a seemingly small word, but it's incredibly significant. It signals change. So whenever somebody uses but, they're changing direction, they're changing perspective. Our writer then uses first. So they're introducing the first idea. They're introducing idea number one. Okay, and that's what our writer does here. And then it says no doubt. Now we've already talked yesterday that this writer presents their opinion, what they think, but in a very factual way. And yesterday they used the prepositional phrase in fact. Now they're doing a similar thing, no doubt. So this is a writer who wants us to trust their opinion and often presents opinion like fact. Entire stereotypes. So again, we've got this all-encompassing language, entire here being used in a similar way yesterday. In the way essay is the word all, okay, and whether you're from Birmingham or not. So this is a writer that even at the level of their discourse markers is directing our attention, but also strengthening their own representation. It's somebody who's giving us factual, strong ideas and information. Okay, so then it says accents are linked to biases. They mark out blank. They are linked to blank. They can be funny until. So this is just going to be a way to summarize this section, because I just want you to pause, reread it, and think, which words would I use to complete this summary? Okay, off you go. Okay, brilliant. What did you get then? They mark out who we are. Brilliant, who we are, that's our identity. They are linked to brilliant stereotypes. They can be funny until they're not. So in summary, this is the problem with accents, okay? This is why this section is called How Far is Too Far. That it's okay to find some accents amusing and entertaining, but if we start to go too far, if we start to mark people out as being uneducated or stupid or thick or common, and then use that information to discriminate against them, we're going too far. Okay, next section. Studies have shown it can take just 30 milliseconds of speech, enough to say hello, for listeners to identify a person's ethnic or cultural background. So here are some of those social factor indicators. Our social identity is made up of our ethnicity, our cultural background. And it says here is being different from their own and makes snaps at very quick judgments about the kind of person they might be, whether positive or negative. Thanks to this kind of bias, so we've got a cohesive link then. This kind of bias is a reference back to the previous paragraph and the idea of people making snap judgments. So snap judgment is the same as being biased, either against or for somebody in either a positive or a negative way. And it says accents can be a shortcut that allows us to linguistically profile others based on the stereotypes of their regional backgrounds, class, gender, or ethnicity, more of those social factors. Without even realizing, we can use this to discriminate. This can make it hard for marginalized and minority speakers to find a job, gain an education, or even find a home. Okay, so in the first paragraph, which social factors are identified? Which noun phrase is used to suggest some people are coming to quick conclusions about people? And then the repetition of the word bias is being used to create cohesion across this article at this stage. So which words are part of the lexical set may be linked to the negative aspect of bias and stereotyping? Okay, so just pause there and complete your answers. Okay, I hope you had a good go at that. So which social factors are identified? Ethnicity, so a person's ethnic, and cultural background are being identified in paragraph 1. Paragraph 2 does pick up on class, gender, regional backgrounds. So actually it's reminding us of the complexity of this issue. Okay, there are many different social factors that can impact on a person's use of language. Okay, so which noun phrase is used to suggest people are coming to quick conclusions? Brilliant. Snap judgments. There it is. Making that quick conclusion about people that leads to bias. And if we're thinking about our repetition of words that show the idea of bias and stereotyping. So what happens when we begin to treat people with bias and to stereotype? Okay, so we've got the word bias. Okay, now it's really towards the end of this paragraph. I was hoping you'd find it. So discriminate, marginalized. Okay, so I'll accept bias, marginalize, discriminate. These are all words. Snap judgments can go in there. It can be transferred across about this lexical set that bias is a negative thing. Okay, we don't want to be biased in our judgments of people. Okay, so just quickly reminding us of our yellow anchor point up there. Okay, how are social factors determining a person's use of language? So actually there's a hint that social factors, your ethnicity, your class, your age, your gender, will impact on your use of language. The bigger problem is how that impact will create a different response in people that potentially can create a positive or negative bias. And that's why this is an issue. Okay, guys, so let's look at this one then. In one study, John Bow, a sociolinguist at Stanford University, made repeated phone calls in answer to newspaper advertisements for apartments using different accents and recorded how many of those apartments were available or unavailable, depending on whether he used African American English, Chicano English, or standard American English accents. When Bao used a non-standard accent, suddenly fewer apartments were available to him. This is not because there's anything linguistically wrong with those accents, but that listeners judge them as markers of racial and ethnic traits that they found undesirable. Listeners can attribute all kinds of unrelated personal traits to a speaker just based on how they sound. Okay, so I love this. The article's bringing another kind of study to support the ideas that they want to raise. So it says here, who is introduced in this section? What is the study or the theorist's name? What credentials go with him? How did he conduct his research? What did he find? And what social factors was he highlighting? So you're just going to pause, reread this section, and complete those headings, those ideas in response to that question. Okay, so although this is a theorist, you could make this theorist now a part of your bank of theorists that you learn and revise, but it's always good to have choice when it comes to theorists, okay? So we've got our main theorist, but he could now join that bank. So what's his name? John Baum. Okay, what are his credentials? Well, he's a sociolinguist at Stanford University. Now, I do love his research. What did he actually do? He telephoned people. He called people on the phone, and when they answered, they were adverts for apartments, and he would change his accent to see how they reacted. Now, actually, it makes me really sad because what he found is the more apartments were made unavailable when he used accents that were associated with what social factors? Racial and ethnic traits. So it's this sense then that people of different ethnic and racial backgrounds do speak differently. They do have a different accent, a different sound when they talk. The sadness that this research reveals is that people were judging them, and they were making a judgment that often was undesirable, that they did not want that type of person renting their apartment. And it reminds us of a level of discrimination that sometimes we think we've moved on from. Okay, so he was highlighting the social factor of ethnic, racial background on whether or not people would rent an apartment to you. So that biased judgment based on how you sound, it seems so crazy, doesn't it? Okay, so next section. Since the 1960s, research has reinforced how listeners can attribute all kinds of unrelated personal traits to a speaker. Height, physical attractiveness, social status, intelligence, education, good character, sociability, even criminality, just based on how they sound. Like in Bow's test, experiments present subjects with different guises or accents performed by the same person. Listeners invariably respond differently when faced with different accents, even if the person speaking hasn't changed. In the real world, these biases can have far-reaching repercussions for those who speak with a socially stigmatized accent. It's thanks to these language attitudes that for some, an accent becomes a source of cultural pride, but for others, a secret source of shame. But these attitudes about the way we sound are so pervasive, that even non-standard speakers may judge their own dialects and accents just as harshly as others do, perpetuating the erroneous belief that their native speech is incorrect and needs to change.